Well, welcome back everyone. This is the Advanced Squad Leader Training video series. This is your host, ID Jester. Welcome back. This episode, we're going to focus in on a few rules that we're talking about close combat against an AFV. If you've been following along in this series, you know that I've switched some of the formatting. I'm trying to cover a specific set of rules within the Advanced Squad Leader system and focusing in on these rules in about a half an hour video so those of you out there can specifically look for topics that interest you or videos that might help you in something you need to be clarified with. We're talking about close combat against armored fighting vehicles. There are some very specific rules that apply to armored fighting vehicles that don't apply in normal close combat. If you look at Section A of our rulebook, subsection 11.1, close combat is a form of attack which can occur only during the close combat phase. Notice there are some very important exceptions: reactionary fire and infantry overrun. Close combat is an attack between two opposing units in the same location. There are no TM or line of sight hindrances that apply to your close combat attack die roll, nor does point blank fire or triple blank fire ever apply to close combat. Unlike fire attacks, close combat is usually simultaneously, so both sides attack the other even if one or both is thereby eliminated, and we will find out that that does not apply to vehicle combat. So when you read these sections, you have to see whether or not it applies to vehicles, if there's a vehicle in the location when you're having close combat. Before we get into that, though, I want to spend a few minutes talking about reactionary fire, which is Section D of the rulebook, subsection 7.2. Reactionary fire is conducted during the movement phase by the defender who uses it to attack a vehicle in that defender's location. So notice right there is a total difference between reactionary fire, which happens during the movement phase by the defender, as opposed to close combat, which is done during the close combat phase. We're going to be focusing in on the close combat that happens during the close combat phase during this video. Another video we might talk about reactionary fire and go through the processes and understanding the rules on how reactionary fire works. But to keep these videos in a certain amount of time frame, I need to focus in on just one specific rule. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the close combat that happens during the close combat phase, as opposed to the close combat that happens during your opponent's movement phase. So if you do close combat that happens during your opponent's movement phase, you're going to be talking about a different section, although some of the rules and some of the processes are similar. There are some specific rules that apply to reactionary fire, and we won't cover those in this video, but I did want to point out there is a big difference between those. Well, let's talk about Section A of the rulebook, subsection 11.31, close combat versus a vehicle. All close combat attacks taking place in a location containing a vehicle, even if abandoned, must be declared sequentially. Must be declared sequentially, even if the vehicle neither attacks nor is attacked. So if there's a vehicle in the location, you notice right off the bat, our close combat processes are completely different than the normal close combat process of squads. Instead of being simultaneous, so here if there is a vehicle, it will be sequential. The non-vehicular player is going to attack first. Also, the non-vehicular player will attack first, but he may only make one attack during that time. If the involved vehicle is abandoned, the player who last possessed that vehicle is considered the vehicular player, and thereafter, each side is going to alternate taking close combat attacks one at a time until all units in that location have attacked, have been eliminated, or have passed. If opposing vehicles are in the same location, which does not happen very often, but if they are, the attacker, the person that's declared the attacker for that part of the turn, will make the first attack. So, if we look at Section A of the Rulebook, subsection 11.6, we're starting to look at how we're going to be doing this close combat attack and what the rules are that apply to that. Close combat versus an AFV. In order for a multi-man counter to advance in a location containing a manned, unconcealed enemy vehicle, it must first pass a PAATC. PAATC actually stands for Pre-AFV Advanced Attack Task Check. Try and say that 5 times really fast. So it must pass this task check before it can enter into the location. Notice that single-man counters, fanatics, and berserk units are exempt from passing a TAATC, and a leader may add his leadership modifier to aid any units in his location with their respective PAATC check, even if he does not advance into that location himself. So if a leader is located in your hex and your location where you have multi-man counters that want to advance into a location with a AFV, your leader can add his modifier, his leadership modifier, to their checks. Also notice all inexperienced infantry must make a 1 TC rather than a normal TC in order to advance into a manned enemy armor fighting vehicle. So inexperienced infantry, again, lower class units, lowest class units are very poorly trained, have poor experience, and they are going to be harder to motivate them to go into a hex with a enemy armored fighting vehicle. Once the same location with an enemy AFV during the close combat phase, no further PAATC check is necessary. A unit which passes a PATTC must immediately advance into the hex, into the AFV location. It may not await the outcome of other units before deciding whether or not it wishes to advance. PAATC attempts need not be pre-designated. So you can decide on the fly who's willing to risk their lives to go in there. And once you decide to roll, if they pass the check, they must go into there. They must advance in. They have no choice otherwise. Remember, single man counters, your leaders, your fanatics, your berserkers are all examples of units that do not need to make a check. So your leaders can see how many squads move in there first before you decide whether or not you want to risk having your leader go in there into close combat with an armor fighting vehicle. If we look at Section A of the Rulebook, subsection 11.5, close combating, infantry may attack a vehicle in close combat but we do not use the odds ratios or the kill numbers printed on the CTT when they do like they're attacking personnel. It's a completely different process. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use the basic kill number of any vehicle in CCC is the close combat value. So the close combat value of the personnel unit attacking it. So you're going to get a basic kill number of a vehicle based on the close combat value of the units that are attacking it. So the CCV is outlined here. The CCV of a squad is 5. A crew has got 4. A half squad is 3. The single man counter is 2. The CCV is further modified, +1 for an assault engineer, -1 if you're inexperienced unit, and you actually get to add +1 if a single man counter combines with the main attacking unit in the same attack. The CCV subject to any form of halving penalties, such as being pinned, is reduced by 1 for each such penalty. If the close combat die roll is less than the CCV value of the attacker, the vehicle is eliminated and turned into a burning wreck if it's less than or equal to half of the CCV. If the close combat die roll equals the CCV of the attacker, the vehicle is immobilized instead. Important note, important note, important note. No more than 2 units may combine into a single CC attack against a vehicle, and one of those units must be a single man counter who modifies the CCV value of the other unit by +1. So you can have full squad, a half squad and a leader, a full squad and a leader, but you can't have 2 squads, 2 half squads, or any other combination. The only 2 units that you can put together is a single man counter and a multi-man counter. A single close combat attack cannot both affect a vehicle and personnel if there's other squads in the unit, but there is an exception to that, except for the PRC of a vehicle, so which are eliminated if the vehicle is destroyed. So if your passengers, riders, and crews of a vehicle, they will be eliminated if the vehicle is destroyed in close combat. However, it should be noted that when you make multiple attacks in the same location, one attack can be made against the personnel and subsequently then attack the vehicle, which perhaps will give you a better chance of success to eliminate that vehicle. So if we look at our little chart here, we have a squad, which is worth 5 combat value CCV, a crew, which is worth 4, we have a half squad, which is worth 3, and we have a single man counter, which is worth 2. Notice that there are modifiers. These modifiers are added and subtracted to the CCV value. These are not added or subtracted to the dice roll. These are added or subtracted to your CCC value. So if you're an assault engineer, you get +1. If you are a single man counter that are added to another unit, you're going to give it +1. If you're an inexperienced unit, you're going to get a -1. And if you have any halving penalties, you also lose 1. And of course, all these modifiers will be combined together to get your final CCC value for your units. Basically, think of your CCC value as the number you need to roll equal to or less on 2 6-sided dice to destroy an AFV in close combat. So just rough guess off the top of your head before we start looking at modifiers. If we have a squad that advances into a hex with an AFV, and he's got a CCC value of 5, then he needs to roll less than a 5 to destroy it. And if he rolls equal to his 5, then he has immobilized that vehicle. And obviously if he rolls greater than a 5, he has done nothing to that vehicle. So if we go back in and look at our vassal module here for the Advanced Squad Leader system, you can find out more information about Vassal at www.vassalengine.org. It's a great tool for setting up scenarios, looking at different counters, moving them around, and checking out different combinations and checking different rules, such as I do. If we look at our units here in our map here, you notice there's a bunch of German units. You can tell on our phase disc here, it is the Axis player's movement phase. We have several squads up here to the north. We have some AFVs down here to the south, and we have some Russian tanks here in the middle. If we look at our units, though, before we get into an actual example, if we look at our squad here in V1, Victor 1, the 248, can you think of how many CCV value points this unit is worth, this counter is worth? Give you a second to think about that. Alright, well, if you remember from previous episodes, if a counter has two silhouettes of units on it, such as one guy carrying a gun here, kind of holding it up, and the other guy holding the gun down here, these are the two silhouettes. This means that it is a half squad. A half squad's CCV value is equal to 3. So this unit here would have a CCC value of 3. Let's look at this unit down here really quick. In V2, the 236. Well, if you said 3, you're not exactly correct. It is a half squad because it has two silhouettes on it. But remember, this class up here in the top right hand corner, the C class stands for conscripts. Conscripts are inexperienced units. Inexperienced units get a -1 to their CCC value. So the half squad would normally be 3. The inexperienced unit would make it a 2. Alright, let's look at W1 here. 10 minus 2 liter. 10 minus 2 liter, if it was to attack an armored fighting vehicle by itself, its CCV value would be 2. 2 is its CCC value. Alright, let's look at this squad here in W2. W2, we got an 838. 838. Alright, well the 838 has 3 silhouettes, so we know that means it's a full squad. Full squad is worth 5, but the 838 is actually a special unit for the Germans. It is classified as Assault Engineer. And remember, Assault Engineers get +1 to their CCC value, so the squad would go from a 5 to a 6. Over here we have a 9-1 liter, 9-1, and that's also going to have 2 as its CCC value. And finally down here in X2 we have a 436. 436, it is a full squad, so it's 5, but remember it is inexperienced, so it loses a point because it's a conscript, inexperienced unit. So its CCC value is 4. So, hopefully that was informative on trying to figure out the different units' CCC value. We go back in and look at a few more rules here, because once we have our CCC value, then we need to determine all the other modifiers that are associated with our close combat attack. Section A of the rule book, subsection 11.51, we're going to talk about the CC die roll modifiers. You can see that if we have an unarmored vehicle, if it's an unarmored vehicle, we get a -3 to our dice roll. Okay? If we have a vehicle without any inherent manned functioning machine gun armament. So if we have basically a machine gun, or if we have a vehicle without a machine gun that's working, you are eligible for a -2 die roll modifier, or I'm sorry, -1 die roll modifier. There's also a +1 die roll modifier to the CCC die roll for every unbroken, unpinned, armed enemy half squad or crew counter. So +1 for every half squad or crew counter, and +2 for each full squad. So if we're close combating and there's 2 enemy squads in there, we're going to add +4 to our dice roll. Not very good odds against our armored fighting vehicle attack. These units are going to be shooting at us while we're trying to blow up the tank. We also have CC location at the time of each attack, and this here button up in half track. So in this, there is an exception here, the close combat location, unless of course they're buttoned up in half track. So these squads are half squads that are buttoned up in half track do not count against us. There is a +2 die roll modifier for CC versus in motion non-stop vehicle. So if the vehicle is in motion or non-stop vehicle, +2 to our dice roll. If there's a ambush could affect our dice roll modifiers. Also, hero die roll modifier could apply. And of course, a leadership die roll modifier applies to close combat versus a vehicle when that leader is combined with another unit in the attack. So leader can't modify its own attack. It can only modify somebody else's attack if it's combined with it. If you look at section 11.61, we have some more attack die roll modifiers. If we have an open top vehicle or partially armored fighting vehicle, we get a -2 die roll. If we look at a crew exposed close top vehicle, we get a -1 die roll modifier. An AFV bow machine gun may not be used in close combat even if it's listed as a main armament. Bow machine guns may not be used even if it's listed as a main armament. But it does serve to avoid that penalty that we talked about earlier, where if you're attacking a vehicle without a machine gun armament, you get a -1. So it will your bow machine gun can't be used in close combat even if it's listed as a main armament, but it can serve to avoid that penalty. Any immobilized AFV is subject to a -1 modifier, and the immobilized die roll modifier remains -1 even if the AFV suffers from more than one immobilization condition. So again, we have a little chart here, might be helpful. Ambush, if we have ambush, we could either, if we're on the good side of the ambush or the bad side, you either get a +1 or -1. Remember, you can only get ambush if in a proper terrain. The proper terrain for ambush is woods and buildings. So unless your vehicle is in a woods or a building, ambush probably will not come into play. If it's an unarmored vehicle, you're going to get a -3, which is your best. If you have an open-topped or partially armored vehicle, that's a -2. And if you have a closed-topped crew exposed, that's a -1. Immobilized is another -1. A vehicle without a functioning machine gun or IFE, which is less than 15 millimeters, another -1, versus a motion or stop vehicle is +2. And remember the big ones here in blue, enemy units that are unbroken, unpinned, and armed, and not buttoned up. For a squad, each squad's a +2, each half squad or crew is +1 each. So you certainly, the odds will be against you if you have several squads or half squads in a AFV location when you go to close combat it. Leadership modifier will only be applied if it's combined in an attack with another unit. Your heroes -1. Your street fighting, which is that special rule restriction we talked about for the movement phase, defensive attack during your opponent's movement phase. So we're not actually covering that, but there is a rule about that. And with ATMM, which is a -3, that is section C 13.7. So if we go into our Vassal module again and we look at our vehicles here in the Russian vehicles, and W4 here, W4, can you think about what its bonuses or penalties are going to give you? Bonuses or penalties, if I was to close combat that? Well, if you said -3, you're absolutely correct. -3. The reason it is -3 is it's -2 for being an open top vehicle, and another -1 because you notice it does not have any machine guns. No machine guns. So -2 for open top, -1 for a no machine gun gives it -3. So your dice roll, if you were to close combat this, much better chance. What about this unit here in X4? The X4, this unit right here. Well, if you look at it, what kind of modifiers is it going to give us? Well, that 85L main armament gun is going to give us a -1 again to our dice roll. -1 because it is, again, without a machine gun. No machine gun. We don't have any bonus or penalty. It is a closed-top vehicle. But you notice it's not crew exposed. So if it's not crew exposed, we don't get any bonus or penalty that way. The only penalty we would have is because there's no machine guns to help protect this vehicle. And last but not least, let's look at the units here in Y4 over here. Another German vehicle, or Russian vehicle. 45L is going to give us, it's going to give us a +2 to our dice roll. Why is it going to give us +2? Because there's the motion counter on it. Notice it's a closed-top vehicle. There's no crew exposed counter on it, and it does have machine gun. So there's no penalty. The only penalty we'll get is because it's in motion. It is in motion. Alright, so we've understand a little bit about how to get our CCC value of our units. And we're kind of understanding a little bit about how to understand how easy or hard it will be to close combat other vehicles. Let's see what other rules we need to talk about. Yeah, okay, let's go ahead and give an example here. I think we're at the point where we can try an example here. Alright, so as I mentioned, we're in the movement phase of the German player turn, the Axis player. Let's assume the Axis player decides to move here with this unit. This unit's going to move down and move into this hex, and he takes the leader and moves it down into that hex. At that point, he's also moving this unit here, and he moves this unit into these hexes and this unit into that hex. So he had spent some movement. Obviously, the Russian player could have possibly defensive fired or done whatever, but the Russian player is concentrating on blowing up these tanks in the next phase. So for just the simplicity of this example, we'll assume that the German player was able to move his units up there. The Russian player then, we move to the next phase, which is the defensive fire phase. At that point, the Russian player uses his 85L tank to just blow this German vehicle up and blow this German vehicle up. And finally, this vehicle over here gets blown up. There we go. Alright. So the Russian player decided to try and knock out those AFVs from the German player and risk a little bit of close combat. So the German player, we go on to the next phase, which is the advanced fire phase. The advanced fire phase, the German player decides not to advance fire anything. He doesn't want to risk activating maybe the Russian sniper or whatever, decides to pass on that, wishes to close combat these vehicles instead. We'll then go into the rout phase. No units need to be routed, so then we go into the advanced phase. This is the phase that the German player needs to decide how risky he's willing to be in moving his units in to try to destroy these Russian vehicles. Right now, the German player's probably steaming mad that 3 of his tanks have been wiped out, so he's willing to risk as much as possible. So the first thing we're going to do is the German player is going to decide whether or not what unit's going to move into close combat. First one, he decides he's going to move this half squad into, he's going to go ahead and move that half squad in to W4 there, but remember, before he moves it, it has to make a PAATC check to find out whether or not it is willing to actually risk life and limb to go in there and fight this armored fighting vehicle. So the check is a task check, which is his morale, which is 6. But he's a conscript, remember, inexperienced units have a 1 task check, so he's down to a 5. But he does have a 10-2 liters, so his total is 5. Modifiers, leader will be -2. So in this case, we're going to assume he makes his check and advances into the hex. Okay, at that point the German player can decide whether or not he wants to move anybody else in. He decides that he is going to move in the half squad in V3 as well. Again, he's got to pass a PAATC check. It's going to be 8. He does not have any penalties for being inexperienced, so he needs to roll an 8. He's going to subtract 2 from the dice roll. He's going to subtract 2 from the dice roll because the leader can help. And we'll assume in this case, for simplicity's sakes, that he makes his check and moves into W4. When he moves into W4, the German player can then decide his next course of action. He decides to have the unit in X3, this full squad conscript. Full script conscript is again 6. He must make his check 6, but since he's a conscript, he's got to make a 1 task check, so he has a 5. And he gets to use his leader bonus of -1, so he needs to roll 5 with the -1 or less. And we'll assume for simplicity's sakes, I would try to roll the dice in Vassal, but the way I roll dice in Vassal, none of these units would make their check and probably break and run away by this time. Again, German player can then decide what to do with the next one. Again, you don't have to declare any Before you make your checks, you can decide who, when, and where, but if you do decide that a unit is going to go and he passes a check, he must go. So again, for simplicity's sakes, this unit has an 8. He's elite, so it'll be 8. He'll subtract 1 from his dice roll, and we'll first say he moves it in. He moves in to that hex because he makes his check. At this point, the German player can then decide whether or not to move his leaders in to those hexes. If he wants to, he can. They do not need to make their check. Remember, single man counters do not need to make a PAATC check. And we'll just assume that he will go ahead and move into those hexes because of the broken down vehicles. He knows that he has got to give the Russians some payback. So if we look here, we have a 3 German units, and we have the AFV in that location. And the same thing over here, we have 3 German units. And he would, of course, do the rest of his advancing throughout the rest of his units. Once he's done, we then go into the close combat phase. Close combat phase. Alright, now we're in the close combat phase. The German player is going to initiate close combat against the armored fighting vehicle. If we look at the hex in W, what is this, W4, remember, the non-vehicular player gets to make 1 attack, then the vehicle can choose to close combat back, and then back and forth you go until all units have either eliminated, attacked, or pass. So if you look at the German 3 squads there, he's got 3 squads in there. Or, I'm sorry, he's got 2 half squads and a leader. Let me not get carried away here. He's got 2 half squads and a leader. How many different combinations can the German player make? Maybe I'm not asking that question exactly right, but I think you'll get my point here in a second. How many different combination attacks in that, if we were to figure out all the different possibilities that the German player has, how many different outcome setups with his units can he possibly come up with? Well, let's think about that. Remember, the reason I'm asking that question is to make you think about the rules again. Alright, well, we know the half squad, the 236 can attack by itself, so that would be one possibility. We know the 248 can attack by itself, which is its second possibility. We know the 10-2 can attack by itself, so that's its third possibility. Its fourth possibility is to combine its 10-2 leader with the 236, so that's his fourth possibility. And obviously his fifth possibility is to combine his 10-2 with his 248. So the German player has 5 different possibilities that he can choose from in deciding what to do. Alright, for the first attack, the German player decides that he's going to combine his 248 with his 10-2 leader. So if we take our 248 and combine it with our 10-2 leader, what is our CCC value? Our CCC value for 248 and the 10-2? Well, the value is going to be, remember, it's a half squad, so that's 3 for CCC value, and he doesn't lose anything because he is an elite, so he would have a CCC value of 3, and he's going to get a bonus because he's attacking with the leader of 1, so his CCC value of the half squad and the leader together, its CCC value is going to be 4. So he needs to roll 4 or less on 2 6-sided dice. But remember, we have a -2 leader in there, and the -2 leader can add its modifier in to the attack. So it's actually going to be a 4 -2 attack. It would be need to have a 4, and you're going to subtract 2 from the dice. The 2 is from the -2 leader. He still gets his modifier because he's combined with another unit. So in this case, we'll roll 2 dice and see what happens here. He rolls a 6 and a 2, which is 8. 8 minus 2 is 6. 6 is higher than its CCC value of 4. So in this case, he has missed his attack against the Russian armored fighting vehicle. At that point, the armored fighting vehicle will close combat back, or it can pass and choose not to. Just for simplicity's sakes, I'm going to just assume, because we haven't talked about the rules yet about the what kind of modifiers we're looking at. In fact, let's go ahead and talk about them now, since we're actually at that point. Before we do, let's look at section 11.621. Basically, this is a special rule. Anytime you roll a 12 when you're close combating a vehicle, the attacking unit is going to suffer casualty reductions. Basically, you running up to the vehicle and it just opens up on you, and half your squad, or you reduce casualty reduction, is going to get wiped out. Alright, when we're talking about AFVs fighting back, alright, there's some special rules with the AFVs as well. 11.62 is what we're talking about when we're talking about AFVs close combat. This is their attack back against the unit that's close combating them. An AFV usually attacks infantry on the CCT table only with its AA machine gun firepower, which is only usable, obviously, when the crew is exposed or if it's fired by a heroic rider. It can fire back with its CMG, and of course there's restriction on that as well, and that your CMG must not be only limited to your vehicle covering arc. You can also fire back with your IFE firepower of a deterred main armament less than or equal to 15 millimeters. The only other ways a AFE may attack in close combat are with rear machine gun factors, with riders, with crew exposed passengers in a half track, or a close defense support weapon. An AFV may combine any CMG, rear machine gun, half-track personnel firepower, and AMG into one or more combined CC attacks. So the armored fighting vehicle might decide that it's going to just fire back with its CMG for one attack, and then maybe it has some rear machine gun that maybe it's going to choose on a different one, or it can combine them all into one big attack. So how do you determine what happens and how this is done? Very simply, all such firepower is used as an odds ratio versus the defender's CCC value, and uses the CCT black number kill numbers. It's never increased due to any condition, although it can be halved because of motion or attacking concealed units by pinned units, or negated by shock or stun, etc., etc. So what you're going to do is here's a little chart here for us. You're going to add up your AAMG if it's crew exposed or manned by a heroic rider. your CMG, and this is restricted by your vehicle covering arc, your RMG, which is your rear machine firing machine guns. Notice there are no instances of BMG. There is no BMG, and you can get your IFE firepower of turreted main armament less than 15 millimeters. You do have rider firepower. You do have crew exposed passengers in a half track, and of course you have coast defense weapon systems. These are the available weapons you can choose from. You're going to get the value of those, and you're going to compare that against the CCC value of the unit you're shooting against. And then you're going to get an odds ratio, and you're going to look on the close combat table to see and use the black numbers, and you're going to see what the number you need to roll is equal to or less. You can combine any or all of these into one attack, or you can separate them into their own individual attacks, or you can combine them however you see fit. You could take a rider and a rear machine gun and combine. If you did have all these, you could, obviously you need to have these to make them valid and available, obviously. I guess I should say that so people don't just assume. You obviously, if you don't have rear machine guns, this option is not available to you. If your CMG is restricted to vehicle covering arc, then you don't have that as well. But whatever you do have available to you, you basically can add up those values, decide if you want to combine them or not, and then use those against the target that you wish to apply it against, and you're going to get an odds value. If your attack is, say, 5 and the defender had a CCC value of 4, you would attack on the 1-to-1 column. So if we look back at our example here, you can obviously see that this armored fighting vehicle is going to decline to close combat back, because it has no AAMG, it's got no CMG, it's got no riders, its main armament is greater than 15 millimeters. So basically this vehicle is got no help to attack in close combat at this point, so it chooses to pass on the close combat attack. So the German player then has his remaining conscript squad. His remaining conscript squad is a half squad. It's inexperienced, so half squads are 3, -1 for the inexperienced is 2. So it needs to roll a 2 just to immobilize it. Remember, you need to roll less than to destroy it. If you roll equal to your CCC value, if you roll less than, then it destroys it. If you roll equal to, and I must apologize, I just thought of something. This vehicle, we did not add in the modifiers for this vehicle in the other attack. Wow. So we are actually going to get a -3 to our dice roll. -3 to our dice roll because this is an open top vehicle which has no machine gun. So it's a -3 for that attack. So let's see. It was 3 -2 for the leader is a -5. He rolled a 6, 7, 8. 8 -5 is 3. And if you remember, its close combat value is 4. So actually, this 10 -2 and the 2, 4, 8 elite half squad has actually destroyed this vehicle. I apologize. I forgot to add that in there. So yes, those of you who are probably thinking earlier, a few minutes ago, that wait a minute, isn't he missing something? Shouldn't that have worked? You are absolutely correct. It should have been, and that should be resolved with a destroyed vehicle. Wow, how forgetting something simple as that, sometimes it comes back to haunt you. Okay, well, I'll try to do better on this one. I apologize. If we look at, we have close combat going on here. First rule we need to look at is the non-vehicular player attacks first. So in this case, the German player attacks first. The German player has 2 full squads and a leader. How many different combinations does he have? Same thing as before. He actually has 5 different combinations. He can attack with the 4-3-6 by itself. He can attack with the 8-3-8 by itself. He can attack with the 9-1 by itself. Or he can combine the 9-1 with both of with the 4-3-6 and also the 8-3-8. So in this case, I'm going to actually try to remember all the modifiers this time. If we look at the 8-3-8, we remember that that squad has a CCC value of 6, 5 because it's a normal squad, plus 1 because it's a assault engineer. Its CCC value is 6, so the German player decides to put all of his eggs in one basket, and he's going to combine the 8-3-8 with the 9-1. The 9-1, so that's going to add another point to the 8-3-8, which is 6 plus 1 is 7. So it needs to roll 7 or less, but it does get the modifier of the leader, since the leader is in the hex and working with another unit. So he gets a -1 to his dice roll, and let's roll the dice and see what happens. In this case, I rolled a 5. Also, almost forgot again, we need to actually look at the vehicle. The vehicle is a -1 because it has no machine gun. So in this case, the 8-3-8's CCC value is 7, 5 for being a squad, plus 1 for being an assault engineer, and plus 1 since he's being combined with the leader. So 5, 6, 7. CCC value is 7, so he needs to roll a 7 or less. He gets a -1 from the 9-1 leader, and he gets another -1 from the vehicle because it has no machine gun. So it's going to be a -2 to his attack. He rolled a 5. 5 minus 2 is 3. 3 is less than or equal to half of what he needed to just kill this unit. And so it is turned into a burning wreck. It is turned into a wreck. He has blown it up. The 838's special assault engineers use their special German satchels and sticky bombs and basically blew that Russian vehicle to smithereens. So, hopefully that gives you a good example of close combat. Again, we're talking about close combat that happens in the actual close combat phase, as opposed to close combat that happens during your opponent's movement phase. There are some specific rules that are associated with that. Last thing we want to just mention really quickly here, section 11.7, vehicle withdrawal from combat. A vehicle is never held in melee, and if it's mobile, may move out of a CC location normally during its movement phase. So even if you have a German German unit in there, if he wouldn't have destroyed that vehicle, vehicles are never held in melee, so they can just drive right away, as long as they're mobile. And a mobile vehicle, or a vehicle which opts to stay in the location where it started its turn with known armed enemy units, may only fire at units in that location and must use case E for any ordnance attacks. Even though a vehicle cannot be held in melee, a non-abandoned, unbroken vehicle also holds all known enemy infantry that apply occupy the same location after a close combat in melee, as long as it remains in the location, unless in motion or non-stopped. So, as you can see, we've advanced quite a bit from our introduction here of all close combats are usually done simultaneously. We know that's not true. There are some special restrictions on reactionary fire when that happens close combat. It happens during the movement phase by the defender. There are some specific rules on that. So in this case, if these German units were here, and it was a Russian player's turn, and the Russian player moved his tank in here, there's a chance that the German player could advance after he makes his PAATC checks into that hex and start close combat in the Russian player's movement phase. But a lot of the same similar functions and processes we just covered are used during that, but there are some specific rules that are associated with that. So please do look up section 7.2 in section D of the rulebook. We know anytime there's a vehicle, anytime, whether it's attacked or not attacked, it is sequential as opposed to simultaneously attacks. Units that want to enter an location must pass their PAATC. Of course, single man counters, fanatics, and berserk units do not. Leaders may add their leadership modifier to help units going in, and inexperienced units must make a 1 task check rather than a regular normal task check. Remember, if you declare a unit making a check and it passes it must immediately advance in. Must advance in. Close combat is going to be based on your different CCC values for all your different units. Here's your little chart again: crew, squad, half squad, single man counter. Your modifiers are going to add or subtract to your CCC value and not the dice roll. Then you're going to actually figure out what the bonus or penalty for the armor fighting vehicle would be, which I completely forgot about in our first example. And it shows you got to be paying attention to everything all the time in ASL, because if you miss something, you can't go back and redo it. So make sure, print out these charts, write them down, look at those sections, whatever you need to do. If you roll a 12, bad thing happens. You're going to casualty reduce for sure. When the armored fighting vehicle fights back in close combat, these are the available weapons and weapon systems that it can use. And of course, vehicles can withdraw from melee anytime they wish, as long as they're mobile. Well, hopefully this has been informative. I apologize for that major error I made earlier in that first attack. That 10-2 in that half squad rolled low enough to actually blow up that closed top vehicle. So you can see having that -3 for the closed top and -1 for not having, or -2 for not a closed top and -1 for no machine gun, giving you -3 is huge. Close combating a vehicle like that, very good chance of destroying or mobilizing that vehicle, as opposed to a vehicle such as this. If we were to take those same units and attack them over here, instead of a -3, we're going to be actually adding 2 to our dice roll for this one, because it's in motion and because it doesn't have any other penalties. So in that case, we would have missed our attack. Much harder if the units are in motion. So look at your different enemy vehicles, find out which ones are going to be easier targets if you can get your squads and half squads and leaders up adjacent to them. Again, hopefully this vehicle was helpful. If there's any questions or comments, please do let me know. Apologize for that little mistake we made earlier, but we all learn from our mistakes, so hopefully we'll try to make that much better next time. Well, till then, I hope you enjoy the Advanced Squad Leader system. This is ID Jester signing off.